act of, of sexual encounter, which more often than not was an act of violence. So that cannot ever, and that's why I prefer it in a way to hybridity. Because hybridity is taking us to plants, we forget, it's just, we're talking about plants. So we are really being very safe. We can talk about hybridity and forget about the violence. But with realization, we can't.
Thank you, Anona, for a brilliant talk. I'm Rituparna. I teach English literature. You mentioned something very interesting. You coined the term sustainable nostalgia. And I had just read your Facebook post a day ago on that when Anu had taken you to Terra Indica. Now, you use the term in this particular instance with reference to material culture, furniture. I was just interested to know what are the other domains in which this can operate?
Yeah, this was the term I wanted to ask about, sustainable nostalgia. And I would ask you to look at it in the context of, the violent histories, and the victimologies of that. So which can hardly, there are darker hues, whereas nostalgia would seem to look at the brighter.
I think I used the phrase, it was a bit of a something that I just thought about literally a couple of days ago. It was sparked by this visit to Terra Indica. And I'm aware that it skates a bit on thin ice, I'm addressing both your questions really together, and I'll come to the intangible and tangible or material, immaterial heritage too. Often in my work, I find myself saying these sorts of things which kind of provokes precisely the sort of response, which is a responsible response. Can we just forget about violence? Can we forget about darker hues, as you said? What is this? Is this like an anodyne? We are almost like anesthetizing ourselves to some things by thinking about nostalgia. And then I'm calling it sustainable, which seems to add insult to injury. Actually, I think we can think about a critical nostalgia. Actually, Aninder Rai Chaudhary has just written a book on it. In fact, one of our colleagues in England, using partition memoirs and testimonies. So, critical nostalgia, radical nostalgia, why not sustainable nostalgia? Now, this is not, of course, to say this is not an explanation. I'm just pegging myself on Aninder's bandwagon here. But I think what I mean by it in general is this, that our presents are very complex and our heritages are also quite complex. Now, many of us here may feel that we are actually not, as I said, we are not born of a Creole genealogy. We are not mixed in any way. But I think this is the point I was trying to make, is that we are all inheritors, however, of a kind of a complicated past in which there are darker and lighter hues both. So I feel that in the milieu that we are in today politically, often we throw the baby out with the bathwater. Often certain complexities of culture are deliberately erased, ignored, or actually vilified because they don't fit into a nativist and purist agenda. And we all know who they are. So the point is this, that for me, restoring certain aspects of a past which are complicated, perhaps in a piggyback mechanism of often looking at more palatable aspects of it, which then can take us to the darker hues you're talking about, is perhaps a way to bring back a more complex story, bit by bit. But this is why the word sustainable is important. There can be nostalgia which is aimless, which is commercial, which is simply, aimed at generating, dollars or pounds or euros or rupees for people and nothing else. I mean, for me, the more I work with culture, the more I see that it's not possible to not collaborate with the market. But there must be some very thoughtful and responsible collaboration between different parties to make any kind of traffic with the past something that is a living and, a venture that can live without a kind of prop. We cannot think of a vampiric modernity that's sucking things out of people. We have to think about sustainable things that generate their own structures of being and of circulating in the world for different groups to partake of. Now, going back to the specific example of Terra Indica, because now I realize it's getting very vague. I'm just talking to myself almost. The Terra Indica is run by, if I'm not mistaken, it's a French person who's been living in India for about 20 years, and he's trained himself in certain arts of restoration, and he is employing a team. Now, this team is completely local, and from what I can understand, they perhaps wouldn't have been ever able to see that kind of furniture, let alone restore it. In the touch of the past, perhaps, that they are engaging in to bring that kind of furniture together, I believe that they are linking back to a kind of furniture that maybe many of us can't even look at, forget about touch. So there is a collaborative effort at going back into something that's material. Where that then leads them, I mean, they do other things. This is an NGO, so they then train them for other purposes. So there can be a network of sustainable products that come out from one chair, you know. We have to think very carefully before dismissing all such ventures as unpalatable or antithetical to a responsible return to the past. And it really goes back to this idea again of the victimology or the victimhood, syndrome. I mean, I've been working a lot with Elmina in Ghana, and that's a very interesting space again, where there is a UNESCO-funded slave castle, with dungeons, where all the, roots tourism, so-called slave roots tourism from the American diaspora go. And then there is a whole town that is dying and neglected, which is precisely the equivalent of our Chinsura and our, Chandanagar's bylanes. It's the town where people lived for centuries, creating mulatto and Creole populations. They in modern day Ghana are not acceptable because they do not bear Ghanaian last names. They bear Dutch last names. And there is a very interesting situation where these people are now talking about the way they can re-enter Ghanaian history. So we can see parallels of this everywhere. And they have now set up a museum to showcase a completely different history of relationship between Java, Elmina, and Holland. So heritage itself today in this world we live in is very contested, and it's open to neoliberal exploitation, and different parties can attach themselves to it. We are not in the mode anymore where the cottage industries existed and there was some states-funded subsidy. Artisans are alive, heritage is alive, and it's up for grabs. We have to make sure that people are not exploited and everybody benefits from a return to the past. And that can take place through combining digital and material resources, as the Dutch cemetery work has done and wants to do more of. So we shouldn't separate the realms either. Every place can have a website now. I mean, there are different ways in which online, offline, material and non-material can interact, and that should be part of this idea of a responsible curation of the past, rather than just simply its commodification. Thank you.
This conversation can continue over tea, which is outside. So please feel free to have tea and continue this conversation, which has been started by Professor Kobi today. Thank you very much, and good evening. Thank you.